Dear diarrhea, diary full of shit. Just play along me, myself, and I, and no one else. Yo, I'm so legit. I have nothing to say, so I figured I'd say some shit. I just realized today's New Year's Day. Yesterday was New Year's Eve, so kind of like in your mind, you think that that's the big, like, party thing, because you might go out and stay out late and have too much to drink, you know, and you got to get home. And, being drunk in a vehicle is obviously a bad thing, but even being drunk in public, I think, is illegal. Public intoxication, and so's having an open container. I think. Now, there's different laws as far as like packaged liquor in a liquor store and whatnot, but unless you're like on a balcony, at a restaurant and you're on the restaurant property, I don't think you can just be walking down the sidewalk or in a public park drinking alcohol from either a bottle or in a glass. I think. I think it's illegal. The only sometimes I think under special circumstances, and I'm just making this up. I don't know this. Is if there was some sort of like street um, fair or some sort of event where they blocked off public streets, so it's no longer, you're not really in the public. They temporarily, like, let's say there was a big festival, music festival, and they have parking, in, I don't know, all over the place. But they also blocked off the streets with those little movable gates, that interlock. And then they have, patrol, be it the actual police or most likely some sort of, what do they call them, rental cops, security forces, services, whatever, to, crowd control, whatever. They're not really cops, but may or may not be armed, may or may not have handcuffs, different levels of authority, I don't know, but, because logistically you still need cops to go fight the crimes and stuff, You don't want the armed security guard, intervening with a domestic dispute, um, a boyfriend and girlfriend and I don't know, some other dude, a jealous ex or a friend that came over that things get a little rowdy, Um, there's probably going to be some substances involved. They're not going to be thinking right. You don't want Joe Blow armed security guard, who's taken 3 weekend classes, in self defense and crowd control, and has got his certification, dealing with that shit. You'd rather have the regular full time, paid by the city camper, you know, what's that? The public sector, So you want the public servant guy versus the guy who works as for a private security company. You still want them, you know what I'm saying, dog. So, um, but they probably have to get permits, So number one, everything's like on record, and there is an element of control that just makes sense. And of course, they're probably going to gouge you and hike up the price. Maybe there's a little bit. It's like 75% of this is actually a good idea. You got to get a permit. That way, we don't have people just setting up shit, willy nilly, in the trunks of their car and shit like that. I get that, especially when it's a big, venue and people want to capitalize on it. So there's probably, a fair amount of legit reason for that. But, politicians and whatnot being, corrupt pieces of shit, who fleece, the community, I don't think the mayor needs to make $500,000 a year. Maybe 100, 125. But 500,000. Fuck you, you piece of shit. Why don't you fix the fucking schools and shit with that money, and implement programs that you do need, regardless of what you're going to say. You need to deal with people who have health problems who can't afford it, and mental health problems, and people need services regardless of how they got there. You know, it may have been a lifetime of bad decisions. It might be some freak accident that happened. Sometimes people need help. And like I said, the world costs money. Um, and, you know, there's infrastructure, logistics, you know, people who are on the payroll, you know, administrative, maintenance, and all that shit. And, you know, just money, 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 money. Cha-ching, 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 cha-ching. You know, rent. Um, you know, the cost of the building. You know, and just all that shit. You know, so you know, there's stuff that logistically makes sense. You need government programs and whatnot. But in the meantime, you know, does you know the state representative of Ohio need to be making $9 million fucking dollars a year? Does the mayor of Podunkville need to be making $500,000 fucking dollars a year? You know, or the mayor of Denver, you know, big boy city shit, big boy problems. We got sewage issues and shit like that. You know, sewage goes down, you know, we just, here in Podunkville, we just call, you know, we got a contract with Hanks. Bullshit, you know, but, you know, oh, the mayor of Denver, he got big boy problems. So he makes, you know, 100, you know, just whatever, you know what I'm saying? So, fuck you, you fucking corrupt piece of shit. So that's where that, you know, gouging comes into play. You know, it's like, hey, you know, it's all above ground, it's above board, it's all legit, man. We got to have quality control, you know. People tend to get a little stupid and shit, you know. It's like, do you need to charge, you know, $500, you know, for a permit when you can get away with, you know, 200 or some shit like that. So, or 75 even, or 50, you know, so whatever. I'm just making shit up. But that would be like a scenario where you could, you know, sell beer, you know, out of a keg, you know, at a little stand, you know, at some sort of festival. But anyway, yeah, DMV is going to be closed today. So's the bank and all that shit. So, yeah, I guess that don't work. I'm glad I thought of that. So, and in the meantime, as a bonus, I spewed all that other extra information, which you know is true because it sounds like it could be. Therefore, I mean, I don't know, but even if it's not, it sounds reasonable, like something that could maybe be a thing. So, you're welcome for that. You want to know how to think? Just listen to me talk. Because what you're doing is most likely wrong.